It's already recording. That's where you're not supposed to be recording.
Board of Co-Chair of North Bay Jobs with Justice, a chapter of a national organization that brings together labor unions, community groups, and students to address local issues facing workers today. Their largest recent campaign was raising the wage to $15 in Petaluma, Sonoma, Santa Rosa, and Novato. Mara has been a student and union organizer for over 10 years, and Tom is a former member of Teamsters, Local 665 now, currently working as a full-time staff representative. Mara and Tom and the team at Jobs with Justice believe that the economy should work for everyone, and that if you work a full-time job, you should make enough to live and care for your family. All work has dignity. All workers should be treated with respect. And in order to raise standards for workers, we need to address unchecked corporate greed and institutional racism, sexism, and homophobia. So please give a warm welcome.
Hey. Hi, thanks for having us. So as she said, I'm Mara, this is Tom. We're from the organization North Bay Jobs with Justice. Can I just get a sense of the folks here? How many people have heard of North Bay Jobs with Justice before? Oh, yay! Okay, cool. So for those of you that are new, as she said, we are part of a national organization, but we're all autonomous. So each community decides for themselves what they work on and how we run our own chapters. Our chapter in the North Bay is a coalition of about 25 organizations. That's just the folks that are like official members, but folks that are involved with the work that we do is like over 35 of us. We're from faith, we're labor unions, we are student groups, we work with various students and have a lot of SSU student interns. And there's 40 chapters around the country. About half of them are actually housed on college campuses called SLAP, Student Labor Action Project chapters, which are really awesome. And I'm going to talk later about some of the work that we do, but I also just wanted to introduce myself a little bit. So as she said, I've been organizing for over 10 years. It's actually a little bit more than that, but I don't want to date myself too much at the university, so I'll stop there. I started doing student organizing. I was like you, I was on a college campus. I was just trying to get my degree. But at the same time, I really cared about the issues that were impacting my community as a Latina, as a queer person, as a woman, and I wanted to try to make a difference in our community. And I also just wanted to like build with other people who are in struggle. So I started getting involved in MECHA. I started helping register people to vote. I found unions. Our grad students were organizing, and we stood out on the picket line with them. So it was really sort of a mix of doing different kind of student organizing. And I came into union organizing, well, I should say after I graduated college, I got into student organizing. I was organizing students to fight for lower tuition, to fight for student child care centers on campus, to fight for in-state tuition for undocumented students. I loved that. I had a really good friend who worked for Jobs with Justice at the time. I didn't ever think I'd end up there, but he said to me, if you like organizing, if you think you want to do organizing for the rest of your life, then you should become a union organizer. It'll be the hardest organizing you've ever done, but if you can do it, you'll know that you can organize for life. And so I joined an organizer and training program with SJW. How many folks have heard of SJW? Cool, they represent all the county and city workers among many other sectors, but that's most commonly here, as well as teachers and healthcare workers. I joined their organizer and training program and started organizing home care workers and security officers and retail workers all around the country. And I really loved it. It was the hardest organizing that I've ever done. But one thing that we were actually just saying a few minutes ago is that I think it's also one of the most rewarding. I think we have a tendency to go to work and feel like, what can we do about our working conditions? Our pay is not good. It's a slew of things. We're not getting our sick time. Our boss is kind of a jerk. There's a lot of unfairness in terms of favoritism with our managers of who gets vacation time and who gets the better jobs, job duties and so forth. So I feel like we oftentimes go, especially if we work for big corporations, and we feel like there's nothing that we can do. Being a union organizer opened up my world to a million different ways that you can be an activist and you can support workers, not just the organizing. But it also made me realize that we have immense power, and that many people with money in this country, including our own elected officials in some cases, work very hard to make us feel like we don't have power. And also the things that we have the most power in are our experiences, are the fact that we're Latino or whatever our ethnicity is, that we're women, that we're survivors of sexual assault, or that we deal with racism. Like, we're often taught that those things are things, our poverty or whatever traumas we've been through are things we should be ashamed of, or things that are a personal problem and what we need to actually address our other issues. But in fact, like, those are the places where we have the most power. So becoming a union organizer opened up my world, because it also taught me how to have conversations with my friends and with my family, and about what it means to have power, and how our bosses need us more than they make us feel like we do. So it was really amazing, and 10 years later, I'm still in the labor movement, working to build power here, and I'll talk after Tom, I'll talk a little bit about what we've been able to do with Good Jobs with Justice here. And then if we have time, we'll try to open it up for, for like some Q&A at the very end.
All right, thanks, Mark. So my name is Tom Woods. I'm a business agent with Teamsters, Local 665. Our local does not represent 1.5 million workers, but our labor union does, so international. Our local represents almost 7,000 workers, moving from Fort Bragg to San Jose, in things like drivers, retail workers, waste and recycling. We got some cannabis work. We're a general union. Historically, the Teamsters, you see the 2 horses on the lower left there, we were stablemen. People parked horses, and we took care of horses, and that's what the Teamsters got started with. And you look around, you don't see many barns. People don't travel by horse anymore. So to stay relevant, we had to become a general union. It was easy to move from horses to trucks. Sometime in the late 70s, 79, we found out that you couldn't just be trucks. We realized that we needed to organize everything. So our labor union represents workers in almost every field. And we're busy representing mechanics and parking attendants. It's fun. In San Francisco, we have a contract that's the master parking agreement in San Francisco. It's the highest wage and benefit for any parking attendants anywhere in the United States. We set that standard, and we enforce that standard. We make sure that you think about it. Parking attendant is not a particularly skilled position, and our parking attendants in San Francisco have this power that there's 3,000 of them, working in that industry in San Francisco, and so as much money as parking in San Francisco generates, we're able, because of our connected, united efforts, to make sure that the workers capture a significant part of that. Myself, I'm a truck driver. I wasn't academically trained in these things. I worked as a truck driver for 15 years and benefited tremendously from the fact that I tripped and fell into a union position. It had been organized 20 years before I got there. And I had so much more as far as benefits and wage than other people doing light work in the area. I didn't even realize how blessed I was, or I felt like all that I had was just based off of my amazing skills as a truck driver, and not, through the combined and united power of collective bargaining. And I ended up on the negotiating committee for my local union, negotiating a contract for the company I worked for. And that's when I found out how important collective bargaining is and how important organizing is. Just move into the college campaign.
Yeah, and can I just add really quick, for those who maybe are new at unions, is anybody here in the union already, or like at a place? Okay, just checking. I think the most simple definition of a union is that it's just you and your coworkers coming together to improve conditions on your work site. And that's the simplest definition. And workers come together pool their resources together. They all pay dues, and that allows them to have office space, to hire organizers and staff representatives like Tom. It allows you to have a lawyer on retainer for when your boss is trying to break your contract. Allows you to have printing so you can update all the coworkers on what's happening in negotiations, on newsletters, and print your contracts so everybody knows their rights. And that's really, at the end of the day, all a union is. Unions are not perfect in any way, no system or institution is, but they are the only legal entity in the country that mandates your boss has to sit down at a table with you and talk and decide with you what they should pay you, whether they should give you health benefits and how much your health benefits will cover, and what your schedules should be, what rights you have, what you should get additional pay for on your work site, and all the various working conditions for how you do your job. There's no other legal entity in the country that requires your boss to have to talk to you about any of those decisions. And since nobody here in the room is a union, then you probably can relate to that, right? You go to your job, you don't like how things are run, your boss says, then leave, or we'll fire you, but this is the job you have to do. And at a union, if they say, hey, we actually want to change the schedules around, or we want to change your job duties around, they actually have to sit down and negotiate it with you. And if you are in between contract time, so your contract oftentimes lasts for a couple of years, you decide how long it goes till. And if they want to bargain for something, make any kind of changes to your working conditions in between that time, you have the right to say, no, we're actually not going to bargain over that. We like how things are. So you have a lot more immense power and opportunity to decide your own working conditions. And that's really what's unique and different about unions. And like I said, we'll take questions later, but I just want to set that up. So I'm going to let Tom talk a little bit about some of the campaigns and work we've done here at North Bay.
So the Recology campaign, that's the garbage services here in Sonoma County. Just going back to my own, how I got involved in the first place was I was working at Marin Sanitary in Center Valley, and we had a very good shift. We had good medical backing. And we were happy, but we were working and we couldn't break this $30 an hour barrier. Contract after contract, we just couldn't do it. And this is how I got there was I became aware of two things. One was 40 miles away, there were people doing the exact same work as I was doing at $27 an hour at the time for $14 an hour. And we couldn't negotiate above that $27 an hour when people 40 miles away were doing that work at the lower pay because they could just be enticed to come down and do that work. And the question that I had was, well, why? Right? I'm getting this great wage. Why aren't they? And why are they willing to work for less? And the answer is they weren't represented. They didn't have a bargaining unit team that would go in and say, okay, yeah, if one person walks in and says, I need $30 an hour, the boss is going to laugh and be like, get out of here, right? But if everybody gets together and says, we're not going to pick up any more garbage until we get paid, if everybody does that, then the boss listens. And that's what that union is. It worked out that one of my coworkers had 5 brothers that were working for Radical, right? And so we had this connection where, he was making as much money as he was and his brothers were not. And when we realized what our, negotiating problem was, and we realized that there was this group of people that had no representation that were working, forget the money, it was unsafe. The equipment that they were using was unsafe. They were working crazy hours. The employer was absolutely not respecting any of the state wage and hour laws. When we started, when we realized that, and we realized that we actually knew someone there, we were able to start this conversation about organizing and bring them in. It started with, the 5 brothers, sitting down and talking about it. And then the 5 brothers brought 2 friends each and talking about, what was wrong and what they needed, how their lives could be improved. And I guess it was about 1.5 years that campaign built really slow. And I know that we had a lot of resources. Yeah. It was fought by the employer really hard. The employer did not want this. Why would you want to pay people more when you could pay them less, right? There was a lot of worker intimidation, but because of that united community that we built, we were able to get them significant raises to the point where right now today, they're at $27 an hour, and they're going to get another $1 an hour next year, and they're going to keep going, and we're going to keep building and helping them out. Because that's what a union is, and that's that's what that organizing is now. Jobs of Justice was involved. This was before I was Jobs of Justice. So
I also just want to add what was really cool about the access to the union was that because so many of the workers are immigrant workers or were in the process of getting their own residency or trying to figure out their own paperwork to hopefully become citizens, one thing that the Teamsters were able to provide for them was they were able to set up a day with free immigration legal services for lawyers and paralegal services from VITAS here in Santa Rosa, came into the union hall and opened the doors to any of these workers to come in and sit down and get help with their paperwork, which would have in any other world would possibly cost them hundreds of dollars or been really inaccessible. So their union not only allowed them to change the working conditions for them at their jobs, but also heard other issues that these workers had and came in and brought resources for them. And that's really common for unions to do, is figure out how else can we help with housing, how else can we help with other parts of your life. And so what I really appreciated about 665 and why I wanted them to come today is also to, they're a good example of how unions can also be a powerful force to stand up to the attacks on immigrants from Trump. So I really appreciated that.
So next slide is about our organizing projects right now. And these are things that people don't necessarily see every day, but we've organized tech buses in San Francisco and on average gotten a $12 an hour increase for people that are providing busing services. Most of the tech buses stuff, when I say tech buses, what they're doing is they're like charter buses that pick up employees of Google, right? And take them to their campus because Google doesn't want their employees stressed when they get there. So they need to have their special air conditioned bus with treats on the seats, things like that. But before we got there, they were still paying their workers like $17 an hour in San Francisco. It was bananas. So, we got them on average about a $12 an hour increase. It's been really good. We've organized the electric scooter companies in San Francisco. So it's kind of a new touristy thing where scooters go out, people can rent them. There's workers that collect them, there's workers that maintain them. Those workers that were being treated like it was a, very low tier service job, and actually a lot of it was very technical. We're currently organizing on that front. We've got a lot of service industry work that we're organizing right now in the North Bay and Sonoma County, and I hesitate to call out the names of the companies that we're working with our employees because we don't want them to be intimidated yet. We want them to, gather their strength and build a coalition around them so that they're supported. This action works. What we do works. Just real quick, just yesterday, there's a parking garage in San Francisco that the Teamsters have represented the workers there for over 100 years, right? It was not a garage back then. It was a barn. There were horses in that garage, right? And that has been our location for 100 years. It has been built into a 3-story parking garage. And very recently, the owner of that garage fired the parking company that was providing services there and brought in a non-union company. And that non-union company was choosing to not pay the wage benefit standard that we've set in San Francisco. Remember I said the highest paid parking attendants in the country are in San Francisco. And they were absolutely committed to not paying that standard. They hired basically the family members is where it started, right? But we can't have that in San Francisco, right? We have been bargaining for 100 years, setting this standard. And so what we did an informational picket. We got some signs out and we hung out in front of that parking garage and we talked to all the hotels in the area and said, don't park overnight cars with your valet in this hotel or in this garage. And we spent 2 days. We spent 2 days out there telling everybody that pulled in that lot, okay, fine, you're saving $10 parking so that guy doesn't have medical insurance. Go ahead, feel good about that. And you know what happened? 20 people parked in that lot yesterday. 3 stories of parking. 20 people parked in that lot. The owner of that lot came out yesterday at 1 o'clock and said, hey, what will it take to get you to have to take your signs and go away? And we said, you know what? If you match the standards that we've set in this area, if you pay your workers, because we're not looking for money, right? That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure your workers get paid. We'll go away. Deal got done. Those guys got their raises. The standard that we've set is protected. That protects every other parking job in San Francisco. It's a done deal. Collective action works. Having people on the street works. Right? If there's any takeaway from our talk today, understand that, yeah, you're sitting as one person, not that strong, right? But if 800 workers at a hospital decide that that's enough, they're not working anymore, you best believe that things are going to change real quick. because collective action works.
And the other thing to note is that what's really awesome about union rights, which were first one was the National Labor Relations Act, or the NLRA. The NLRA, everybody has rights in this country, regardless of your race, regardless of your documentation status. In fact, undocumented workers are leading many of the fights to raise worker standards across the country right now, including here. We'll talk about that in a minute. But regardless of anything, everybody in this country, if you are working, if you are performing work, you have the right for your wages, you have the right to your overtime pay, you have the right to go out on strike, and you're protected. And you have the right for the protection of the National Labor Relations Board to the extent that they're good about that. They are not perfect either. That's why Jobs and Justice exists, but you have the right for them to come and investigate what you're claiming is a violation of labor law by your employer. So I think that's really important to recognize and just to follow it for sure. So a little bit about North Bay Jobs with Justice. So I sort of told you a little bit about the framework. So we're a coalition. We have a national structure. So we have a national coalition of national unions and organizations. But just like on a very basic level here in our chapters, we're a little more than 25 organizations that are formally members of North Bay Jobs with Justice. But in the wake of the 2017 fires, we started the Alliance for a Just and Sustainable and Equitable Recovery. So AJR for short, Alliance for Just Recovery, and that table has an additional 20 members, 20 organizations, mostly environmentalists, but labor and housing organizations from across the North Bay that we have put together like a policy platform, and we've done some organizing together. And so we are a coalition of a lot more than just the 25. Our motto is that we show up for each other. So you can go to our website. It's northbayjobswithjustice.org. You can sign our pledge. We ask that you come to 5 fights that aren't your own, that you stand up 5 times a year for other people who are fighting, just like Tom was saying, they're fighting for them to have livable wages. They're fighting so that they can have health insurance, that they can take their sick kid to the doctor and not worry. That happens all across the Bay Area and particularly here in Sonoma County. And the only way that we're strong is if we show up for each other. So when Jobs of Justice was created in 1986, it was because particularly 2 things were happening. In 1986, there was Black women call center workers in Detroit who were fighting to organize a union with the communication workers who represent like Verizon and AT&T and probably someone else I can't remember. And their bosses decided a week before their union election, where the federal government, the National Labor Relations Board, comes in and administers an election for you to decide if you want your union or not. The bosses decided to close down the call centers completely and move to another state. They brought the women in one by one to tell them that they were closing down and they were fired, and they had armed security guards walk them into their office one by one at different times throughout the day so they couldn't even see each other or talk to each other after they had gotten shocking news. Had a guard watch them collect their things off their desks. This kind of hostile response to workers, we still see. How many folks are following what's happening at UC Santa Cruz right now? So at UC Santa Cruz, grad students have been fighting for fair wages and fair workloads for the last 2 months. They've been on strike, and UC Santa Cruz 2-3 weeks ago sent riot police, just like they did at UC Davis, where they pepper sprayed them in the face directly. So these are students, just like you, on their own campus, just sitting out in the park, just peacefully, quietly having sit-ins and striking with picket signs and just saying that we want fair pay. And their bosses respond to them like they are dangerous, hostile terrorist threats. That is the kind of response that happens to workers all the time, unfortunately. And without the collective power, those students have unions and have many organizations and unions behind them that are going to back them and support them. In the 1980s, that didn't necessarily exist in the same way that it does today. And so groups got together to say, we're not going to stand for this. It's completely unacceptable to these women who were simply fighting to be able to do their call center work better and get paid a dignified wage, that this would happen to them. And so CWA stuck with them. Community organizations and activists and students all came together to support these women and built one of the first Jobs with Justice chapters, which later became a national network of chapters all around the country. At the same time, there was Cuban American workers in Miami dealing with a similar situation with their boss. They already had their union, but they were fighting for another contract, and the CEO, the new CEO that had taken over, was notoriously known. This was at an airline that doesn't exist anymore, or got absorbed into, I think, American Airlines. It was called Eastern Airlines. The CEO that took over was notoriously known for bankrupting airlines in order to save all of the investors their money and not end up having to pay any of their workers when they weren't making their profits. So before they even went to the table, the machinists is who they represented, the workers there, they pulled community members and family members and organizations out onto the streets, and 500,000 people took the streets of Miami before the bargaining even started, which is pretty rare. Usually, like, you're on strike because you've been in bargaining and it's not going well, negotiations. So this is what was happening in 1986 when Jobs of Justice got started. And so we said the only way that we are going to be able to win for each other in labor is if we show up for each other. Workers cannot just be out there striking by themselves for themselves without the support of the community. And the community benefits when workers are taken care of. That benefits all of us. When healthcare workers can organize, we are better taken care of when we have to go to the hospital. When our teachers are better taken care of, our kids get a better education and our community benefits. So we really saw an opportunity to bring people together. And there's two ways we do that. We do solidarity campaigns. This is where, when we hear about workers standing up and fighting for a contract or fighting to build a union, we turn out tons of people. We go out to their actions. We'll blow up our Facebooks, we'll email out to our listservs, and we'll shame the bosses for what they're doing if they're doing bad boss behavior. But the other thing we do are strategic campaigns where we will lead and run our own campaign. So I'm going to share with you some examples of that. So the first one was the Superior Court workers. So in 2017, a few years ago, our Superior Court here in Sonoma County decided that they were going to go out on strike. They had been in negotiations. It was breaking down. We started that with what's called a Workers' Rights Board hearing. So in Jobs of Justice, one of the things we do is we'll hold a public hearing with the media, and we'll turn out tons of members of the public. And we bring in elected officials and community leaders to come and sit on the panel, kind of like how we look now. And we invite the workers to come up one by one and give testimony in a public hearing to what's happening in their workplaces. We have planned and announced more hearings than have happened, because when bosses find out, they freak out. They do not want their workers coming up in a public hearing in our community and telling everybody about the terrible things that their bosses do to them, or the fact that they are doing work for us in our community without being able to take sick time off, or without having any health insurance, or without getting paid adequately, or without being able to see their own kids because their schedules get moved so often. So a lot of problems were happening there. So we started with a Workers' Rights Board public hearing where over 100 people turned out to hear what was happening. And it was completely humiliating. The CEO of our court was fired after that. And they went out on strike. And oftentimes we talk a lot, and I know I've said it a little bit today, but like, workers are going out for pay and benefits. And yes, that's important. But also, workers go out on strike because they're concerned about the services that they're delivering, whether it's like a teacher delivering good education or a healthcare worker delivering patient care. And in this one, it was particularly important because who are the people most impacted by our criminal justice system? Anyone? Take a guess? Poor folks, low income people, I prefer, but yeah, low income families. Who else? People of color. Who else? What just happened recently at our courthouse? Immigrants, right? And young people, and all sorts of folks that have been disenfranchised historically in our society. So those court workers were also fighting because they felt like there was not a fair system for people to come in where it's already challenging to have to go through our criminal justice system. You are probably already there because you've been disadvantaged. So they went on strike. Their boss was fired. The entire way that the court systems was redone. They had access to judges and things were changed around. And obviously they also got the things they're asking for wages. The teachers of Forestville and West County last year. So did anyone see this on the news at all or see this on your Facebook? Yeah, so I just asked because this was really interesting and unique for me, although after it came out, some people said they'd heard of this before. So the teachers started to organize, and they had picked a day for their picket or their strike. And the Saturday before, the superintendent and the school board filed a lawsuit and served the teachers president, the teachers union president, papers not to picket, not to strike, which is totally illegal and would have been probably thrown out. But the night before the court case, they withdrew out of how much public shaming we did to them. But low-wage teachers who were making anywhere between 17% and 33% less than the average teacher in the state of California, which, just to remind you, we have the highest cost of living here in the Bay Area in the entire state, not just in the entire state, but in the nation. And we have the fastest growing. So our teachers here were making the least behind the average pay. I don't know if you remember, but when school started last year, it was 90 degrees. It's 89, 90 degrees on the first day of school. They didn't have AC. And many teachers and students had to go home sick. They had large class sizes. They were combining classes and asking teachers to pick up more. They didn't have resources for their school, for their classes. And so both Forestville and West County at two different times, I think maybe like 2 or 3 weeks apart from each other, went out on strike. And Teamsters brought like a small busload of people. I mean, Jobs of Justice turned out folks from around the area. We did a canvas, Jobs of Justice canvas to the neighborhoods. And right where the superintendent and school district's building was right in a residential area. So we canvassed 3 blocks all around, and every single home agreed to put up a large sign like what you're seeing in the political signs right now. We stand with the West County teachers. Every single house agreed to put one up. And when we drove down that street, when every school board member and superintendent had to go to work the next day, every single house said, shame on you. And they won everything. They won their pay, they won smaller class sizes, they got AC in all of the classrooms, and they won more support. Our healthcare workers of Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital, which I did not know, the organizer is here. So Larry, raise your hand. So this is Larry. Larry is the organizer, just like Tom is for the Teamsters. Larry's the organizer for all of the non-nurses, so all the other healthcare workers of Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital. Although you do have some nurses? Not Memorial, okay. So if you have any questions, Larry is a great resource. He's also been an organizer for 10 years. So one thing that folks have been addressing last year is, for one, like better mental health services, which is not just Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital, but NUHW workers across the state have been fighting to ensure that they can see patients. Once they see somebody, they weren't able to schedule an appointment for at least 6 weeks later, which for those of you who may have family or friends or just know about folks who are dealing with trauma or violence or any kind of other mental health issues, like that's not acceptable and leads to one of the reasons why we have high suicide rates in our community, or homelessness, or people not being able to stay in their jobs or in their homes because they have unchecked mental health. And so they were out on strike saying this is unacceptable and we need to be able to see our patients when we need to be able to see them. Safe staffing. So in order to Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital CEO Rod Hoffman makes $6.9 million a year. But he...
No, we got a raise. We got a raise last year.
$10.5 million. Rod Hoffman makes $10.5 million a year. Yet they are constantly cutting corners at Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital and trying to lay off. Now, 3 times in the last 3 years, they've tried to lay off staff. That means that when we or our mom or our sister or brother, a family member, a friend, when any of us end up in the hospital, if you're on heavy meds, you may try to get out of bed because you're disoriented. If you fall, you are at risk of what often happens is breaking a hip and ending up in surgery. And for the elderly, they die. Like that is like actually life-threatening for them. But even in the less severe cases, just hurting yourself more.
Or just lying in your own filth for hours.
Going to the bathroom and like there's nobody there to come and clean you because the hospital has decided it's more important to pay their CEO millions of dollars than to provide 1 or 2 more nurses or CNAs on your floor. So, so the healthcare workers are constantly fighting to ensure that they have safe staffing, and our hospitals would be a lot scarier place if it weren't for their union. But that's a constant battle. And so as you hear about healthcare workers going out on strike, please join them or support them, or at least spread the word, call the boss, call the manager and say, this is BS, because they're fighting to make sure we have safe staffing, and also just sexual harassment, which happens as well, particularly for the non-certified staff, so for our housekeepers and for nutrition staff and so forth. That's something that workers have stood up across many industries, but even particularly at our hospitals. And then the last thing, and then the last thing that I just want to share today is one of the strategic campaigns that we've been doing. So those are examples of some of the solidarity campaigns. Those are just the ones that I had time to put into this PowerPoint, but like all around the county right now, workers have been standing up and fighting. One thing that didn't land in here that I thought would have was 300. We helped organize, the Labor Council as well as us helped organize 300 people to show up in front of the downtown Hyatt in Santa Rosa to fight for about 160 workers, most of which were immigrant women who were standing up to fight to form a union. They started in 2017. A year later, they haven't won. So in summer of 2018, we organized 300 people to show up and make noise, and they won their union. And they were cleaning 36 rooms a day in an 8-hour shift per person. Yeah, back-breaking work, constantly bending over, constantly picking things off the floor. We've all seen how we've left some of our hotel rooms before. Like we get it, right? So women were literally getting injured and being told, well, if you're injured, then I guess you can't work here anymore. They had no health insurance. Now they clean, and the standard that Unite Here had fought for in San Francisco, as Tom was saying, there's a standard set, is 14 rooms a day. And they were also getting paid minimum wage here, and now they're getting paid closer to $20 an hour. They only clean 14 rooms. That changes if they have a suite, and they've won sexual harassment buttons. So now they have sexual harassment panic buttons in all the hotel rooms at that downtown Hyatt. So just to say, that's what we're working on. So our strategic campaign, the biggest one we've done, and she said it in our introduction, which was great, is that we fought for 15 last year. So we raised the wage to $15 an hour in 4 cities. How many people here have heard about that? Okay, great, cool. People are hearing about it. Did anybody benefit from it? Does anyone here see their, yeah, you saw your wage go up? Air 5.
You're welcome.
You're welcome, yeah. No, it wasn't just us. But we led that campaign. We actually started at the end of 2018, so it officially sort of launched last year. But one of the reasons that I said union organizing made me realize that there's so much more you can do than organizing is we started with a research report. So you can go to our website and read 2 awesome reports. One is what's the impact of a $15 wage in all 4 counties up here, so Marin, Solano, Napa, and Sonoma. But we also started with a report called The State of Working Sonoma. This is a great report written by Jesus Guzman, the board chair of the Great Day Labor Center, also with Policy Link, who helped us break down who's actually being impacted by the fight. Actually, can you go back? So just some stats from that. 1 in 5 Sonoma County families are living in poverty. The average age of somebody making $11 to $13 an hour is 33 years old. They are majority women. They are majority Latinos, and majority really just means more than 50%. So it's not necessarily overwhelmingly, but they are more than 50% women, Latinos, immigrant workers. And we know that this group of folks are also paying anywhere from 30% to 50%, half of their monthly income just to their rent alone. This is an issue that impacts everybody across the board in terms of like demographics, like men, white folks, like everybody is impacted, but this is a majority of people based probably a lot on industry, like home care workers, domestic workers, hotel workers, and waiters and waitresses. These are some of the lowest paid working folks in our community, and a majority of them oftentimes it's women's work, and many Latinos and immigrant families and folks of color are filling those jobs. And 1 in 7 workers making less than 15 have a bachelor's or a master's degree. So a lot of folks we're out getting our degrees, and we're still ending up in $11 an hour jobs. So we won 15 by 2020. Petaluma and Sonoma already went to 14 and 15 this year, and then Santa Rosa, Nevada will go on July 1st. And then on January 1st of 2021, so this next January, all the cities will move together to $15 plus the Bay Area CPI. So that's calculated every year, but it's right now, we were calculating it at about 50 cents, but the CPI is a little high right now, so it might be closer to like 60 cents or 65 cents. So on January 1st, all the cities will sync up their wages at $15.50 or $15.60. And it'll go up about that much every single year from here on out. So we'll always be higher wages than the state. The city of Sebastopol, we just launched. Is anyone here from Sebastopol or lives there? Okay, cool. Well, we just launched in Sebastopol. We'll finish up Cotati. And our big campaign this year is that we are taking the fight for 15 to the entire county of Sonoma. That's going to be really big. So if any of you are interested in joining us, working with us, getting class credit, SSU offers you up to a full class, like I think 5 credits to come and work with us. That's going to be a huge fight. Or if you just like giving elected officials who hate workers a hard time, join us, because it's going to be really fun and they're going to hate it.
Yay.
And that's it.
So we got time for some questions. If anybody has anything that, sparked in your brain when we were talking, we'd love to answer it.
Yeah, question. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I came in a little late and I apologize, but I wanted to say I really am glad to hear not just talking about the wages and working conditions that you are so critical for, but the way you can improve life in other ways. So, for example, the legal claims for immigrants or the panic button. I teach criminology and criminal justice studies and have been for years. I've been paying attention to those panic buttons because people don't realize the rate of sexual assault and rape that housekeepers and janitorial staff experience when they're working sometimes alone at night, or sometimes when they walk into a room and there's a customer who's doing something, saying something inappropriate. So much more common than the public rooms. So that's important. And I was wondering, is that something where the workers approach the panic button, or is the union now pushing out that suggestion? Let's have panic button.
I don't think it came from here, but it certainly did come from workers. Because part of what's great about having a union is it's not just like, okay, we won this contract and now we don't see our union or our union staff for another 3 years. What's great is that unions have, because people pull their resources together and their dues, they can have conventions and they can have trainings, and they happen all across the state, so that workers can go and continue to get trained and get skills, hear from each other. Like, so particularly for Unite Here, hotel workers were getting supported to come to meetings and trainings and conventions around the state and around the country and talk to other hotel workers and be like, well, what's going on at your hotel? I'm at the Hyatt in San Francisco. Well, I'm at the Hilton in Denver, and here's the biggest thing that's happening to us. Or I'm here at this hotel in LA, but we're up here in Sonoma County. So workers being able to come together and talk about those issues, that's when the women started to realize, like, I have had this shameful experience, or experience that has felt shameful that I feel like I can't talk about. But the union has provided a space for us to come together and talk with my fellow union colleagues about a personal issue. And as women started to feel, I mean, probably not just women, people, as people in the union started to feel comfortable talking to one another about those issues, they realized this is affecting a lot of us and we actually have to do something about it, and it cannot be, oh, that's Maria's problem over there, and so Maria needs to address it at her hotel, but we realized it was actually something that needed to be addressed across the board. And so the ability to have a union means that now you have staff with expertise and a lawyer who can help draft the language, the legal language, but then it's really on the workers to say, if you want that, we're going to collectively fight for it in each community, and they needed a standard across hotels across the entire country. And actually, what was really cool recently is we were fighting, they're building a new hotel, well, they're rebuilding a hotel up on Round Barn Circle. We went up there, we said, it was burned down, it's on a fire path, but we actually just don't think this is a good idea. It ended up passing, but what we asked the city council is, if you're going to pass it, we want to ensure that the workers have the right to unionize, and we want to guarantee sexual harassment buttons in all of the architectural plans. And so they agreed, and they mandated that onto the hotel that's getting built. So it's a standard that workers have been able to create now, union workers, for even workers who may not be union for that hotel now. Other questions? Questions about unions?
So I guess if you don't have any questions, I get another couple seconds of your time.
Yeah.
What we do is it requires activism in the workplace. It requires people to step up and demand things. So if you could take anything away from our talk today, it's that change can happen, that you have this power to make that change, and all you need is to get together with your coworkers and reach out. You know, if I get a phone call from someone that's, you know, says that their employer's not paying their sick time, guess what? I'm excited. You know, now we got somewhere to march, we got somewhere to go, we can make some change. You know, so throughout the rest of your life, you know, you get in a situation where you're not being treated right, you're not being treated well, there's resources out there. And we don't just walk into employers very often and just be like, hey, guess what? Teamsters, we're going to organize you, right? Because that's a good way to get thrown out of a building, but give me a call, right? I'm going to meet you at a cafe somewhere, we're going to talk about it. You know, and if it's not right, if it's not what works in your workplace, that's fine, right? I don't want to represent someone that doesn't want to be represented, but if you guys are in a situation where you could use representation, call us, right? We'll be there because I'm a worker. You know, this is, I get it. I drove a truck for 15 years. I understand what it's like to work in that industry. And I represent a lot of industries, and I'm learning all the time. There's one unifying thing, that is the people that do the work are undervalued. That you have real strength, because that business that you work for, it doesn't exist if you're not doing the work. It just doesn't. It's not a thing. It's nothing if you're not doing the work, and you have that power. You can stop working, right? Which means you can also demand better conditions.
Yeah. And you also don't have to join an existing union either. People also all the time as a part of an independent union. So you have a right to, in this country, form any kind of union that you want. And I promise you, any kind of work you do, it is in a union somewhere. So somewhere you can link up with other workers who do the same work as you and find out, are they getting paid more than you? Do they have benefits you don't have? Do you have things they don't have that you guys could link up and have power together? Or do you have some similar experiences with ways in which your workplace could just be better? So there are bakers in unions, there are filmmakers in unions, there are writers in unions, we have a musicians union here, engineers and scientists, and mental health workers, and anything that you think you can name, it exists. And even if it isn't that you are ready or want to form a union, but you just want to handle something. So we have workers who called us recently to say, our boss isn't giving us sick time. Can they do that? No, they can't. So Tom and I are working with them to make sure that they get their sick time. Maybe they'll want a union coming out of that. Maybe they won't. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to stand up with them. And so we've got our legal power, we've got workers, other workers, and we've got political power. We've got the mayor coming in and working with us, and we have a great chapter of activists. The ones that helped us raise the wage are going to come out and help support if we need them. So that's something that we do with workers all the time. Particularly this year, a big one is going to be around wage theft. So we are going to take our fight for 15 to the county, but we also know that workers are working unpaid overtime, or they're working through their breaks unpaid. I was a part of a lawsuit a few years ago against Victoria's Secret. That's where I worked when I was in college and high school, and they would have us come in 15 minutes early every day to open up and get stuff started. But we couldn't clock in until our shift time, and the workers filed a lawsuit, and we won. We all got a couple $100, but we won like billions out of Victoria's Secret because that's wage theft. So any work you're doing on your job, you should be getting paid for it. And that's going to be a big part of our work. So check out our website and follow us on Facebook and Instagram to hear more about that. Any last questions before we wrap up, or comments? Questions, comments? Who wants a union now? Anyone? Cool, we'll complain.
Who wants a business card?
Great. Thank you all for your time, and thanks for coming.